Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about these 4 images which I captured in my last video where I visit Cathedral Quarry in the Lake District. If you haven't seen that video already, then go and check it out. I'll put a link up here and also in the description down below. Before I start talking about the images, I'll tell you a little bit more about my trip to the Lake District. Well, you probably saw one of my other videos where I was in Ennerdale. Now, that was the main part of my trip. I went and stayed at the youth hostel there. And Ennerdale is a really remote part of the Lake District for anybody, even if you live close by, simply because there aren't any main roads there. There's no major destinations to visit other than a car park and the youth hostel. And it's just a bit difficult and less accessible than a lot of the rest of the national park. I wanted to go there because I just wanted to visit a different part of the place and see if there were any images to be had. And I think that a lot of people will say that Ennerdale doesn't have as many great photo opportunities as the rest of the Lake District, and they might also say that the light that the valley gets isn't as good as other parts of the lakes too, and those things might be true, but it doesn't mean that there aren't any opportunities to be had, and I wanted to go and explore and find them. So as it turned out, on my trip actually I did have trouble in getting photographs in Ennerdale itself, and that came down to the weather and my mood and all kinds of things. But the result of that was that I thought that I would go out into other parts of the lakes on my way back and see if I could grab some photos from other places. And that's why I went to Cathedral Quarry, because it's a place I've never visited before, and I know that many people have, and I've seen lots of images from there. So without further ado, let's start talking about some of the images. The ones that I've actually selected for this video are ones that people have noted as being their favourites. Now, I think that I got some good feedback actually on all of these images, and some people were saying they were either it was one of my best videos or that they're some of their favourite images of mine that they've seen. And I've been looking at them and trying to understand why. So I've picked out the images which people have said are their favourites and the ones which are my favourites. So the first one is the first image that I display, which is the black and white conversion of inside the main cavern of Cathedral Quarry. And it is an amazing place, and when you walk in you do get this sense of it being very dark because you've come from the outside, but with these massive shafts of light coming through from that main hole, and there's another one to the right of that hole which you can't actually see from this angle. And what it does is that light really picks out the highlights and the definition of the rock. So the decision to make this black and white actually came when I started post-processing. It wasn't something I'd pre-visualized, but when I was playing around with the tone curve and trying to get things exactly right, I realized that I was making parts of the image dead black, as in there was no detail there at all. And then I started to look at it a little bit closely and thought that the greens actually started to distract from the impact of the light. So I decided to strip all colour of it completely and then make it a lot more contrasty than I would have done if it were a colour image. And then I think it really started to work then. I think what a lot of people have actually said that they like about this image as well is that how the mist is highlighted in this scene. And the mist is there simply because of the conditions. Now, the days leading up to this, it was raining a lot, and then it started to get really warm. We had a little mini heat wave here in the UK at the end of April, and that's when I was there, and so that heat combined with all the moisture creates mist anywhere, everywhere, and when it's in a cold place like this cave, then that's when it really starts to come out. And the mist was one of the things that really struck me when I first walked into the cavern, and I think that's why this image works for a lot of people. The next image that people have said that they like is the one where I've included myself. Now, I don't normally do selfies for a few reasons. One, because it means running out in front of your camera when you put it on a 10-second timer. And 2, you have to make sure you've got the focus on yourself right, and 3, I tend not really to like selfies. I like the scene rather than the people in the scene, if that makes sense. All that said, I do understand why this one works, and it is something that I like too, mainly because me down there adds scale to the image. so you can see how tall the cave is. It's at least 10 times taller than I am, or 15 times that you can see from here. And two, it adds a little bit of interest within the cave that you might not notice when you first glance at it. You'll see the light, you'll see the rock, and then you suddenly see this figure down here with their face illuminated. It just happens to be me. But as you can see, compositionally it's very similar to the first, and therefore has a lot of the impact that the first does, just not in black and white. So moving on to the next images, in the comments of that video I asked people what their preference was, whether it's wider images or the more intimate or close-in details. Now, personally for me, I like the details because I think it's the details that make up a scene, and those are the things that catch my eye. And quite often the details of a scene can be an image in their own right, and that's what I aim to capture a lot of the time when I'm in a place, because when I see those things, then I try to drill down to what it is that I like about the scene, and then I capture that detail. This one of the fern is one of my favourites as a result, because what I saw when I walked into that cave and when I was exploring was this backlit fern and the foliage that was hanging down into the cave. This is what caught my eye initially, probably more so than the main pillar that stands out in the middle of the cave. And it's because it was such a contrast that you have this bright green foliage hanging down into a dark black cave. And with the mist surrounding it, it just gave it that slightly more ethereal or abstract quality, and that's what I really liked about it. The fact that there were just some parts that were highlighted, there were other parts that fell into blackness. It was just a very nice looking image, and I captured this one and also one from further back, which included some rock. This one is my favourite, I think perhaps because you are left to imagine what else is going on in that scene because it's so dark, and I just like it. I think it's very nice. The final image that I'm going to talk about here is the branch outside of the main cavern. In the central hollow of Cathedral Quarry, if you've been there, there are steps that lead down where you can look down into the main cavern. There's lots of trees and lots of plant life there, and this is where this image was captured. Now, I didn't see this image straight away. I think some people have commented that you must have a really good eye to spot things like this, but I was on the lookout for something like this, if you follow me. What I did notice was when I started walking down into that main hollow is that there's lots of trees, and against the rock they stand out because they're juxtaposed. They're completely different. One is delicate and one is hard. And I started to photograph quite a few different trees against the rock, and wasn't quite satisfied with what I was getting, so I kept exploring and kept looking and kept trying different branches and places. And because I was looking for those specific things, that's how I noticed this branch, which took the course of the rock, and that's why I decided on this being the main image that I was going to capture here. It just followed the shape of the rock, as you can see, and that was what was so specifically interesting about this for me. That's not the only thing, of course, because there was also these very small spring leaves popping out, which just added to that juxtaposition and added the interest to the image that might not have been there if it was just the branch. It just highlights the fact that the branch is there, I suppose. And the moment that this image was taken was at a moment where the sun had actually started to break through some of the clouds that were there, and so it just helped illuminate those leaves just a little bit more. I like the colours, I like the shape. It's maybe not the most perfect composition, but I do like it a lot, and so many other people have commented that they do too. One thing that came to my attention after I posted my last video was a comment, and some comments that I've received quite a lot throughout previous videos that I've uploaded, is about including camera settings. And I know that quite often in videos on YouTube, people will include details about their camera settings as they're taking the picture or after they've taken it and are showing it to you. And I can understand why that's helpful. However, the reason that I don't talk about camera settings is because I'm just not thinking about that at the time. Now, you might think that that sounds silly and that I must be thinking about what settings I'm using. But I think when I'm actually creating the video and when I want to communicate to people that are watching, it's not the camera settings that are important to me. It's either the reason why I'm taking the photograph or what it's a photograph of. And I think that that's the more important side of photography for me than the actual camera settings. So when you're learning photography, camera settings can be important. And like I said, I understand why people want to know what they are. But I think the important thing with camera settings is that you just need to understand fundamentally what different settings do, what effect they have on the final image, and then practice with it. Practice is a really major part of understanding what camera settings are going to give you and what camera settings do in terms of your photography. Because if you know the fundamentals, then you can start applying them in real life situations. And that's what I do all the time. So in this image, I knew the end result that I wanted to get. I think I mentioned in the video that I was trying to maximize depth of field so that you could see detail in the rock and the branch. Now they were quite far apart, so the depth of field was pretty big. I'm using a telephoto lens which compresses them, and if you have a small f number, so a large aperture, that's going to create a lot of a discrepancy in terms of the how sharp different parts of the image in terms of depth. If you're following me, I know I'm waffling a bit. What you need to understand from that is that I used a large f number, so a small aperture, which maximizes the depth of field. So that was the choice that I made at the time. But what you didn't see in the video is that I experimented a lot with different settings in terms of where I was focusing and what f number I was using the aperture preview or the depth of field preview button on my camera, just to understand and see what was going to get me the best results for that image. Now, obviously, the more that you practice, the more you know the results, and the more you photograph certain types of scenes, the more intuitive that becomes, and then you don't have to experiment as much. So I guess what I'm trying to drive home here is that you just have to experiment, and that somebody telling you what camera settings they've used are not going to help you achieve the result that you have in your mind, because you're not going to be photographing the exact same thing that they're photographing, or you're not going to be there at the same time of day. The light is going to be different. You're going to need to use different types of exposure compensation, and by that I mean whether you're using ISO or whether you're using shutter speed or aperture. The scene will dictate the settings that you need to use, not somebody else's example. Maybe that doesn't make complete sense, but I hope you get my point. Yes, I could tell you the camera settings for all of my images, but if I'm perfectly honest, I don't know what they are unless I go and check the metadata. And the reason for that is that at the time I am adapting to the scene, and I'm selecting the settings which are going to help me achieve what it is that I want to achieve. And as I said before, every scene is going to be different. You're going to be photographing different subjects in different places. They're going to be at different distances from one another in different light. My camera settings are not going to help you take a better image, trust me. But what I will challenge anyone to do is to have a look at any images that you like and try and guess what those settings are yourself. Because if you can work them out, and if you can then see how you can apply that to your own images, and I'm talking about what focal length that might have been used and what aperture, those are some good places to start, because then you can understand the effect that's caused and how you might apply that effect to the images that you take. That's a much better way of learning and understanding from looking at other people's images, in my opinion. If I'm completely wrong and everybody wants to hear my camera settings, then maybe I'll just put them in the description notes on each video if it's what people really want. But that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and please remember to give it either a thumbs up, a comment, and share it with anyone you think that might want to watch this. And if you've been an avid follower of my channel but aren't yet subscribed, then please consider doing so, because being subscribed and clicking the bell icon means that you get notified every time I put an upload out, and that means you will not miss any. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.